My name's Tim. If we've not met before, I am one of the leaders here at Vineyard 53, and it's great to be with you this morning. I'm also going to say hello, not live, to people who are going to say hello later. We've had some technical issues this morning. Teething issues, new term, new room. Hello, that's it. And just to say, we have moved rooms if you're joining online. So if you wanted to get the authentic experience, you could move rooms too. I love a good fantasy story, be it Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter, Narnia, Alice in Wonderland, whatever it is, albeit pretty mainstream choices there. Don't like anything too left field. I love it. And as I start this morning, I want to focus in on a little repeated theme that we find in fantasy, and that is the interruption of the main character's everyday life, an introduction into a new world that they couldn't even have dreamt existed. So you think about Harry Potter, you've got Harry stuck in the cupboard under the stairs, and owls start delivering letters, and then finally Hagrid shows up, knocking the door down with a cursory, sorry about that, and you're a wizard, Harry. I'm really bad at impressions. I didn't warn my wife that I was going to do that. Sorry for later. And Harry's world is never the same again. There's a new reality for him. More old school, but what about Alice of Wonderland fame? She's sitting by a riverbank, bored, and then out of the blue she meets the White Rabbit, running along the riverbank in his waistcoat, lamenting that he's late. And Alice follows him down the rabbit hole and into a world of nonsense where the rules of our place no longer have any bearing. Well, then there's Narnia. You've got the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. 4 siblings playing hide and seek in the professor's old house until Lucy finds herself stumbling through the coats out of the back of the wardrobe and into Narnia, and her life is never quite the same again. And today, we're at the start of a new term. It's a time of transition for many of us, kids starting school, new beginnings, new jobs. Even if we haven't had many changes, I've not had many changes like individually, it kind of feels like a new beginning, a bit of a transitional moment. And at the start of this term, God is inviting us to step again into that life that we could barely even have dreamt existed. A life that we couldn't think up for ourselves, that we couldn't manufacture for ourselves, and that we couldn't even begin to realise on our own. Jesus says this: I came that they might have life and they might have it to the full. And we are that they. It's quite funny. I came that they may have life, but we are that they. He came that we might have life and have it to the full. Life abounding, life overflowing, real life, full life, a life that we could never dream of. And it's the life of heaven, a life which we won't fully know until Jesus comes again and makes everything new. But this life, the life of heaven, is breaking out into our everyday. In moments of sheer joy and wonder, it bursts into our families and our friendships, into our workplaces and our homes, into the public sphere and into our very private thoughts. And this new life gives hope. It gives beauty for ashes, joy for mourning, praise instead of despair, hope of life where we see death. It's not a naive new life. It doesn't ask us to forget the darkness and the difficulty, but it comes into the middle of the workaday, into the middle of the tragic, into the middle of the dark, and into the middle of things that are just okay. And it comes into this context with transformation. Darkness is eclipsed by light. The difficult load is replaced with the easy load. And this is where the life that Jesus gives us plays out, in transformation in every part of our lives. And it's fantastic news, fantastic. Not fantasy, because it's true, but once we've come across it, this life that Jesus offers, this transformative life, we should never see the world the same way again. And that's what we want to lean into this term as a church, the transformative power of life with Jesus. Back in February of this year, John and Anna, who lead Vineyard 53, they're on a sabbatical. They come back in just over a week's time, but they set our direction for the year back in February. And we set 2 different kind of pedals, we call them, pedals. It works when there's 2, because the bike has 2 pedals. Sometimes there's 3. Can they be pedals then? Anyway, these are things that have really concerned me over time. But private thoughts come out. Anyway, first thing we were going to contend for this year, first pedal for this year, was contending for community. After lockdowns and isolation, we've worked hard at community together. trying to find a place to connect again, not to settle for isolation, but to share life with one another. And that's going to continue, that remains our focus. But secondly, this year, we want to cultivate transformation. So each week, when we gather on a Sunday, we say a few times our little vision statement, the statement of who we are and what we're about as a church. And this is what we say. We say, we are Vineyard 53. We're a church on an adventure, inviting people into a relationship with Jesus and seeking transformation in every part of life. And this term and for the rest of this year, we want to dig into that every part of life transformation. As we approach this term, we're going to think about it from two different angles. We're going to think about it in terms of inward transformation, and we're going to think about it in terms of outward transformation. Every part of life transformation is offered to you and to me as individuals internally. Jesus offers you new life, and he offers me new life too. He offers us hope, love, acceptance, forgiveness, joy, peace, patience, and all of that, all those good things. But it then doesn't end there. We're the hope of the world, we're the church, we're the hope of the world. We're transformed people going to transform places. We're called to go out and to share this transformation with others. So we want to love our neighbours. We want to welcome the homeless and the refugee. We want to see unjust institutions transformed. That's what we're about. But there's more, because as we go out, we're further transformed. And as we're transformed, we bring yet more transformation. The two things happen in tandem. It's cyclical. And that's the life that we're invited to. And in a few weeks, Tracy is going to come and share a bit about outward transformation, how we're going to press into that this term. There are a number of new opportunities that we have as a church to go out and partner with God to see transformation in our region. But this morning, we're going to focus in on cultivating inward transformation. The life of Jesus breaking into our own lives, here and now. How can we position ourselves, and how can we position ourselves as a church to cultivate our lives so that we see this transformation, see that life that we couldn't dream of. Okay, so two different ways that I think we can do that this morning, two ways that I want to focus in on. The first way that we can cultivate transformation in our lives, I think, is to cultivate mustard seeds. Not literally, obviously, not literally cultivating mustard seeds. But Jesus talks about mustard seeds a few times during his time talking about this new life he wants to bring. And this is what he says. It's going to appear on the screen, hopefully. If you've got a Bible, you can find it, Matthew 13, 31 to 32. So it says, he told them another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed, which a man took and planted in his field. Though it is the smallest of all seeds, yet when it grows, it is the largest of garden plants and becomes a tree, so that the birds come and perch in its branches. Jesus is telling us here, the kingdom of heaven, and I think this morning we probably should think about that as the life which Jesus is inviting us into, the life which Jesus brings. The kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed. It's a tiny seed, but it grows into a huge tree. And that's not the only time he talks about mustard seeds. He also says this, truly I tell you, if you have faith as small as a mustard seed, you can say to this mountain, move from here to there, and it will move. Nothing will be impossible for you. So the smallest amount of faith is all that's needed to see the miraculous happen. Faith as small as a mustard seed. Now, I forgot the worst prop ever. I was going to bring in a mustard seed. It was a really bad prop because you wouldn't be able to see it. So actually, not having it makes absolutely no difference whatsoever. So here's the mustard seed. Not actually there. That's the point. It's really, really small. It starts small and it grows big. And it's all we need to see mountains move. And if we want to see transformation, we need to start to cultivate this kind of mustard seed expectation in our lives. We need to be people who are growing in expectation, increasing our expectation, people who live our lives seeing little bits of new life, pockets of joy, glimpses of grace, and expecting them to grow. We need to start to be people who look at the challenges of our lives, the dark places, with enough expectation that we can see the mountains of loss, of insecurity, of doubt, grief, and hurt move away and fall into the sea. That's what we want to be. We want to be a church of mustard seed faith. But practically, how do we do this? How do we do this? How can we cultivate expectation in our lives? I think it begins by living into the story of what God is doing in the world. We find the story in the Bible, but it is also in the world around us. God's kingdom is breaking out into our world today. So I want to share a couple of little stories as examples. One, very local, very recent. The other, slightly bigger picture and further afield. But first of all, I'm going to watch a little video. This is Rob's story. It's a story from earlier this summer, and we recorded this on Friday. But yeah, I'll let Rob tell it in his own words.
Hi, my name's Rob. Along with my wife Jean, we've been members of Vineyard 3 years. Well, we had a dead ash tree, this ash dieback stuff that's going around, very, very close to the house, 6 foot from the house, and it had died, and we had to take it down, which we did, took it down, and we've got a chainsaw mill which actually cuts planks out of blocks, and we thought we could get a few planks. In fact, you could photograph those planks if you wanted. So it had been raining. We had a long trunk of about 10-12 foot, and Mike, my son, was with me. We lived together here, and I lifted up the end, and then so I'm crouched down. I lifted it up, and my foot slipped. I fell back. There was a log behind me onto the log, and of course it had my own weight and this heavy log as well, which very, very painful. My son-in-law's a doctor, so he came up and examined me, and he said you really damaged your muscle, and it's maybe 3 or 4 months before you can really do normal stuff. I think 6 days later we were going to Seville to see Dan and Abby, and the Lagos Hope was in, so we had a chance to spend some time with them. I thought, there's no way can I go getting on an aeroplane. There's no way I could get through the airport. So we looked at maybe looking at a wheelchair. Now, Heather, Lizzie and Doreen were praying for me, particularly when we got to the airport. Well, Mike took us there. I got in the car and I had to lift my leg up to get it into the car. It was very, very painful. And going to the airport, I was holding on to a handle on the side of the seat to try and keep every little tiny bump. My back was sore. Anyway, we got to the airport, and I sort of shuffling along, dragging my suitcase. So these folk were praying for us. As soon as we got through the doors, I said, Jean, look. I was walking normally. I'm not saying I was completely healed. It was still painful, but I was able to walk normally and go through the airport fine, get on the plane fine. Everything, it was great. We got back, and we had a leaders meeting. And I know Tim prayed for me from the back, and again, straight away, I felt an improvement. And about 2 weeks later, it was gone. Now, it wasn't 3 or 4 months, it was just slightly over a month before I was back to normal. And God is just wonderful, isn't he?
Isn't that wonderful? Just want to say, Rob made one mistake in recounting that story. I was there. I didn't pray for Rob. It was somebody else. Isn't that wonderful? Isn't that wonderful? Jesus is still working today. He still heals today. And we need to hear those stories. Because if we want to be expectant for God to be moving in amazing ways, miraculous ways, and he does, then we need to be hearing those stories and allowing them to let our mustard seeds grow and cultivate. And that's just one of the ways that Jesus' new life breaks into ours, just like that. Another story, and this time nowhere near as personal, but it's a story I love because I love its hope. Mount St. Helens, volcano in the US, erupted in 1980. This is what it looks like now. I couldn't find an image that copyright allowed me to put on the screen with how it was, but that hole wasn't there, volcano. But it erupted, and the intense heat of the eruption melted away the soil and left behind bare rock coated with ash, and nothing was living there at all. And the scientists and Forest Service rangers wondered how long it would take for things to grow there again. And then one day someone stumbled across a patch of wildflowers, ferns and grasses coming out of the desolation. And the growth was in the shape of an elk. So the plants had sprouted from the organic matter that had been left behind by this elk when it was buried in the ash. And I think that even when it looks like there's nothing left, God is bringing life. He is transforming ash into beauty, quite literally in that story. And so if you came this morning tired, worn down, in a difficult patch, take heart. I think mustard seed, it's not just the miraculous, it's also just holding on to hope and trusting that God is bringing new life, that his kingdom is breaking in, even when the situation looks bleak. So I think that's where it starts. Increasing our expectations starts in living into, listening to, and telling the story of what God is doing in the world. So let's be sharing stories. Let's be sharing stories. And as we hear those stories, I think the second thing is to change our posture. To change our posture. And earlier this week, I got caught in the rain. I'm sure I'm not alone in that. I was walking from a coffee shop in town where I had been writing a bit of this talk, and I was walking towards the church offices. And I arrived underneath this bush to shelter myself because it really started chucking it down with rain. And there was this sign, and I was busy thinking about expectation. And this was this sticker, and I've paraphrased it to make it Sunday appropriate, but it says this. When you walk through a storm, put your brolly up, you silly billies. Something like that. And to me, this felt like really quite apt. If you live in a world where it's raining, you should put your umbrella up. If you live in a world where God's new life is breaking in, live in a posture that's expectant of that. We need to be looking for that. God is breaking in, so we need to be looking for it. We need to position ourselves to receive it and to see it. We need to go into our workplaces, onto the streets, into the supermarkets, spend time with our families, and be here on a Sunday, ready for God to send his rain. Not with an umbrella to hold it off, but with our hands open to receive what he's doing, and then to respond. So we tell the stories, we listen to the stories, we adopt an expectant posture to see what God might want to do here and now, but then also that we step out. And most of those stories, apart from the St. Helens one, me walking down the street and seeing that silly sign, or Rob and his back, they all involved a moment of someone stepping out and saying, I think God might be doing this. He might be moving to a miracle, to bring some healing here today. Or he might just want to speak to me through a silly and slightly rude sign on the side of the road. But we've got to be ready to listen and to step out into that. It starts as a mustard seed and it grows. A couple of things just to be aware of as church at this moment as well. That we want to be expectant as a church. We're gathered here today on a Sunday, and we gather here almost every Sunday. And we want to be expectant that God's new life is going to bring transformation into our lives here today. And on Wednesdays, small groups aren't all on Wednesdays. In the middle of the week, when we gather in smaller groups, and as we go about the rest of our life. But specifically on Sundays, we've made some changes this term, and we want to make you aware of them, just so you know why we're doing them. We moved into this room, not just because it's nicer, but it is nicer. I think it's a lot nicer. But also because it allows us to arrange ourselves to see that transformation. We can move around the room. We're not stuck in a long line. Like, if you open your eyes in worship, you can see somebody, not like a wall. We can actually do life together. We can interact with one another in the room. We can see what God might be doing and go and step in and join in with that. We also changed the timing slightly in the gathering. We haven't quite managed it today, but hopefully there's going to be a little bit more space at the end. So we're going to leave time and space to silence for God to come and speak and to start moving among us. I mean, he's already moving among us, but create a special space. Then there's going to be a little bit of time of worship as well. And the idea there isn't that we all join in with singing, but that we really create a bit of space and honour that space for us to stand with people, to pray with people, and just to really, really make sure there's room and time before we have to go and get kids at 11:45, that there's plenty of space for us to engage with what God's doing and to see him bring his transformation. So that's a couple of things that we've changed. I think the invitation is to, I've written down here, lean in. But I think it's also to dive in, that there's like a river of what he's doing. There's a river of what he's doing, and he wants us to dive into that. And so if we want to see transformation come, then I encourage you, when we get to the end, come forward for prayer. Come forward for prayer if there's something you need prayer for. Come forward for prayer if there's something there's nothing that you need prayer for. it's always a good time for someone to pray for you. And if you can see someone around you who's come up for prayer, go and pray for them. I think those are things. Engage with God. Brilliant. You might have missed the last word there, people on the recording, but that's okay. Wasn't too important. So let's grow in our expectation this term. That's the first thing. Let's be people who cultivate mustard seed faith. The second thing that I want to mention is what I'm calling vine work. Vine work. So we've got mustard seed cultivation and vine work. Jesus, in some of his most famous words, he says this: I am the true vine, and my Father is the gardener. He cuts off every branch in me that bears no fruit, while every branch that does bear fruit he prunes so that it will be even more fruitful. You are already clean because of the word I have spoken to you. Remain in me as I also remain in you. No branch can bear fruit by itself. It must remain in the vine. Neither can you bear fruit unless you remain in me. I am the vine and you are the branches. If you remain in me and I in you, you will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing. The work of transformation of God's life bearing fruit in us is not only a matter of the instant and the miraculous, it's also a process that can be long and slow. God sometimes shows up in an instant, but often it takes showing up repeatedly, again and again, presenting ourselves before God for him to change us and to transform us over many, many years. And I think Jesus is really clear here. He says, no branch can bear fruit by itself. Neither can you bear fruit unless you remain in me. And in practice, I think this looks like consistency, showing up before God week after week, day after day, and asking him to have his way in our lives. I've seen this a little bit in my own life. There's a picture of Lancaster might appear on the screen, for no reason apart from I was in Lancaster at the time, and it's beautiful. This isn't Lancaster, it's just outside, but what a place. At 18, I got rejected from the university I hoped to go to, and overnight it felt like my life plans changed. One day I had it all figured out, what I was going to go and study and what I was going to do after that, and then the next day it wasn't going to work out anymore. So I was trying to decide what to do next, and some leaders at the church I grew up at suggested that I stop and take a year out with them, and I'd never even thought about it before this point. I had a plan, I was going to go through with it, but then there was nothing left to lose, there was nothing to lose, so I just said yes. And my friends all headed off to university, but I stayed behind, deferring another university place until the next year, unsure about what I was going to do with the rest of my life, but knowing that I may as well do this year. What could go wrong? Little did I know at that point that God had plans for the year. I went into it with my own kind of way of life, and God slowly but surely started to break that down, giving me the beginnings of a gentle trust of his way for my life. And I began the year as a real perfectionist, who got cross when things didn't quite work out, and I finished the year like slightly less of a perfectionist. God's starting to soften that and show me again that his way was better. And I started the year a ball of strongly held and unalterable opinion, and ended the year with a little bit more patience and a little bit more empathy. And by the end of the year, I was a different person to the person I was at the start. Not that I'd arrived somewhere, but there was a journey that I was on, and the transformation over the year was profound. Laura, my wife, and I were together at the time, and we struggled to account for the difference that we saw in my life over that year. And I'm sure of this, that the thing that made the difference was just the regularity of showing up before Jesus. I had to be at church every Sunday. I had no choice. I had a day a week of prayer, worship and study with some other folks at a similar stage of life to me. I was encouraged to get stuck into the Bible and into prayer. This was a year of vine work, a year of letting Jesus' life in and starting to be fruitful. And I want to emphasize that while it's slower, the work of showing up again and again is no less dramatic than the instant and the miraculous. It might take longer, but the change is just as dramatic. We don't need to lower our expectations for the change that happens over a long period of time. I never dreamt that I would see any change that year, and yet God did some wonderful things in my heart. In my notes, I was going to tell a little story about C.S. Lewis, but with the Queen dying this week as well, I was reflecting on the Queen's life and the way that she over the years, particularly towards the end of her life, kept bringing us back to the hope that we have in Jesus. And I was just reflecting as well on the fact that over many, many years of following Jesus, of pursuing Jesus, which was very private, but we kind of assume that it's happening, like, seem to have shaped and formed the Queen. Someone said this about C.S. Lewis. They said that he was the most thoroughly converted man I ever met. Most thoroughly converted man I ever met. And I've just been reflecting on the kind of the Queen's life as well, and the impact that knowing Jesus had had on her over so many years. That she died at that old age early this week, but thinking about the impact that knowing Jesus over so many years has had. God wants to transform us thoroughly in every area of our lives. And if we want to see it, we need to keep on presenting ourselves before him and saying, God, have your way. We live in a culture of 24-hour makeovers and YouTube videos promising ways to lose weight really fast. I know because I've watched them. But at the start of this term, as we seek to cultivate transformation, I think God is inviting us again to a kind of renewed, or for some of us new, commitment to him. He's inviting us to increase our engagement with him, to increase the regularity with which we come before him, expecting him to do the instant and the miraculous, yes, but also desperate for him to do his transformative work in the long and the slow, knowing that we may not see the transformation in this lifetime, but that God is going to finish what he started and that he will make all things new. I just want to point you again to small groups too, launching again. These are a really key place for us to come before God together regularly as a community, to open ourselves up and to say, God, come and have your way. Transform me. I want to come into your presence. Please transform me. And so if you've never done a small group before, I encourage you to check out the list and find a group where you can invite God to do his work of transformation. So that's where we are. Start of a new term, and we're kind of focusing in on this direction of cultivating transformation. We want to see our lives changed, inwards and outwards. We want to know the fantastic reality of God's life breaking into our present. So let's be expectant for God to do wonderful things. And let's be committed to keep on showing up day after day, week after week, expecting that God will bring his transformation, whether it takes a moment or whether it's the work of a lifetime.